Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paging All Radio Curious Hackers. If this is not what you thought this talk was, now would probably be a good time to not be here. Otherwise, welcome. So quick, who am I? I think this is the obligatory way to start a presentation. I'm Paul Tagg. I am a software engineer. I've done a lot of work in the free and open source software community. I've had jobs, often successfully, and none of them are related to this talk, and so I will spare everyone the appeal to authority. That kind of begs the question, since none of my jobs are in any way related to RF, why am I giving this presentation? Which is a reasonable and good question to be asking. And the answer is largely because I'm not qualified to give this presentation at all. I am going to be coming at this from sort of a software engineer with a little bit of curiosity on the security end, with as little radio knowledge as possible. The goal here is to get people feeling comfortable and interested in RF and have this feel a little bit more accessible, which leads me into my next point. There are lots of things I'm not qualified to talk about, so why am I not qualified to talk about radios in particular? And I thought it was a particularly interesting subject for DistrictCon because there's an awful lot of devices out there that communicate. Things that use Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, there's a lot of established tools and hardware, and there's really straightforward ways to debug and understand how those devices are interacting with other things near it. With a lot of RF protocols that are sort of opaque, proprietary, that's not the case, and this seems to drive a lot of people out of looking at some of these RF links, and so my goal here is to try to demystify this a little bit. Also, I hope everyone here likes watching YouTube videos at 1.5 speed. The 2 dry runs were 30 minutes long, so I'm going a little fast. Apologies in advance. So this is what we're after today, restaurant pagers. I was sitting getting a breakfast sandwich from a DC restaurant that will give you a breakfast sandwich in a scallion pancake that I will not name because they're not sponsoring me. I will take a sponsorship in the form of scallion pancake breakfast sandwiches, though, if anyone's got it. TD158 restaurant pagers. So I ordered some off eBay, and I was curious at how they worked. I was holding it in my hand. That's, well, is it communicating with anything else? Is it secure? What's going on here? So I bought them. And here's kind of the crash course out of the manual. So none of this is anything that you can't see by reading the handbook. First of all, pagers are tied to a base station. This is a base station. It's a little box. The base stations have a unique ID, hopefully unique ID, that is 3 digits long, so up to 999. Right off the bat, some of you might be doing the math on that. It's 10 bits to store that number. So anything over 10 would store the base ID. Same with the pagers, 3 digits there. You can call 0, and that asks the devices to turn off. It goes into a kind of power saving mode. You can put in a number for a pager and call it, and it would cause it to ring. You've probably all seen these before. You've eaten at restaurants, I assume. You have to put it back on the base station to stop ringing. And there's some extra functions here to change how often it beeps, how often it vibrates, how long to beep, how long to vibrate, stuff like that. So off the bat, before I got down to work, I set my base station ID to 55. Why 55? It's a weird number I like using. It's usually not one that people are going to encode into a constant. It's not like 1, 2, or 3. Everyone loves 1, 2, and 3. It's also got a cool bit pattern, 110, 111. And the reason that I like that number in particular is because it tells you if it's most significant bit first or least significant bit first based on which end of the 3 runs of 1s are on. So that I did set, because out of the box it's 1, and I don't like 1. And so if you look at the back of the box, there's a helpful blow up here. Something jumps out at me right away, which I love. For regulatory compliance reasons, these devices have records on file with the FCC, and they're labeled with an FCC identifier. And that means that we can find the filings online, which is a great way to help bootstrap information. So there's this great website, FCC Report, fcc.report, it's a great domain name. And they aggregate all sorts of PDFs pulled out of the FCC website. And browsing them, I found one in particular that I really liked. This looks like a diagram and charts, and there's numbers and fancy shit, and that's cool, right? I'm going to take a look at that. And so right off the bat, we see a frequency of operation, 43392. That might be kind of weird to some folks in the room. It's actually the dead center of the band it operates in. These pagers operate in something called the ISM band, the 400 megahertz ISM band. If you take the top and bottom and you find the dead center, it's 433.92. And so a lot of these devices actually sit at that very weird frequency. So great to see, very relieving. Probably not going to be terribly complicated. Also given this chart. So if folks have worked with oscilloscopes or hardware engineering, this may look like serial data. In fact, it's very similar. We just use antennas and crystals, and it's very witch coded. But we're gonna roll with that. So the first thing I got around to do is to use a software-defined radio. So these are devices that will listen to the airwaves and write that data to my hard drive for analysis. So I captured a signal. I started up my software-defined radio, had it writing to disk. I paged a pager, and it wrote something called samples to disk. What are samples? This is where my dry runs went wrong. I can easily spend 20, 30, 40, 50 hours talking about samples. So apologies to the grown-ups in the room. And if you have any questions, there are many people here more qualified than me to answer it. You can basically think of samples like if you had a Raspberry Pi and an Arduino, and you were just reading the analog pin in a loop and writing those values out. At the end of the day, the data we get off of the software-defined radio is values of reading of power over time off a pin. They come in pairs, sort of like a XY point. This is called a complex number. The complex number represents power over time. And so that's really where we're going to stop knowledge of samples. If you have more questions about this, we should get into it. And so from here on out, we're going to assume that we have int8 samples. So there's going to be pairs of 8-bit integers that are together representing power over time. The way that we open this up is using a tool called InSpectrum. InSpectrum is free and open source software. It allows you to load it and view the data in there. So if you think about a sample file as like an audio file, InSpectrum is sort of like Audacity. You can open it, you can look at the data contained within, you can look at the spectrum, and you can try to get a handle at what you're looking at. And so this is InSpectrum, and this is the data I captured off my software-defined radio for one of these guys. You can see there's some dots and dashes. And there's some toggles on the side that you can play with if you want to do this yourself, and I encourage you to, and after the session we will. But critically, there's one setting here that's interesting, which is the sample rate. So how many of those samples per second you're taking. By filling that out, that lets us get information about timing, so how long these bursts actually take in terms of seconds or microseconds. So be sure to fill that out if you're interested in doing this yourself, and it requires knowing the sample rate, which is something that would come with your IQ capture file. Okay, so this is a view of the same data that we were just looking at. This is in Spectrum. I just changed the colors to make it a little bit easier to see here. Good news, it looks like we actually have data. But if we look at the first packet, it kind of doesn't look like data. We got a bunch of short bursts. Doesn't look like anything's really changing all that much. This is something usually known as a preamble. This tells devices to wake up and start doing the more compute-intensive task of understanding the data to follow. So this we can put to the side for now, but good to know there is one. And this actually looks data. It looks like data. And so that burst right there, and then every block after it are the same. I went and checked them. And so you can see that there's some dashes that are short, and there's some dashes that are long. And that's interesting. So the data is varying. So if we, again, kind of zoom in on that section, so this is the same data that we were just looking at, just kind of blown up a little bit more. And we split it up into something called symbols. So each symbol there is a bit of data in our scheme. So over time, each of those symbols will change, and each of those, at the end of the day, will be a bit in this scheme. Symbols aren't always one bit, but that's fine. We don't have to get into that. But by measuring it critically, we can figure out the length of time that each symbol takes. So here you can see it's 858.462 microseconds. So we know that each one of those blocks is exactly that length of time. Additionally, we can kind of zoom in on the symbols themselves, and we have two different ones here. We have either a short one or a long one. If you kind of measure it really carefully, the short ones are a quarter of that symbol in duration, and the long ones are 3/4 in duration. And so if we multiply that through, if we just do the math, so if we do 1/4 of 858, we get 214.5. And if you do 3/4 of 858, we get 643.5 microseconds. So we know each of those little blocks is a specific length, 858, and we know how long it needs to be on or off for. Finally, between the packets, we can measure the duration, the spacing between each subsequent data packet. Because these are one directional, the base station's transmitting to the pagers, but there's no back and forth. it sends the same data over and over as a form of resiliency, rather than doing something like forward error correction. So it's just going to broadcast it a couple of times and hope that it can read at least one of them. Here, if we measure it, there's 6 symbols worth of padding between the 2 data bursts. That's roughly 5.15 milliseconds. So good to know. That spacing probably isn't critical, but I like being a little pedantic when it comes to this stuff, and I'd like to reproduce it exactly. And so I wanted to know the exact length of time. So that just leaves us with the question, the fuck is this? So again, a reasonable question. So we have a short one and a long one. So right off the bat, maybe one's a 0, one's a 1. I think that's a pretty straightforward thing, and there's certainly other protocols that look very similar to that. So if we just rock off that assumption and do these by eye, so just put a 0 below the short one and a 1 below the long one, we can get a couple of bits out. Maybe these bits are interesting. I don't know if anyone's seen it right off the bat, maybe not, but the first 10 bits come out to be our base station ID, which is great. This is fantastic news. We were looking for 10 bits, and we were looking for 55. And the first thing being sent are 10 bits of 55. So that's great. But I don't know what those are, right? That could be anything. We transmitted a turnoff. I don't know what the 0 is. We don't know where the boundaries are here. We kind of have no further information, which sucks, but is not unexpected. Next move is to capture more data. If I transmit a couple of different signal types, maybe I can use that to figure out what's going on. So I plopped down the base station on one of my SDRs, and I just sat down and ran captures over and over and over and over and over, right? Call 1, call 2, call 3, off, function 1, function 2, function 3. These are the basic call types. I've done the work of demodding it all doing it by eye and putting the 0s and 1s already. And so here's the different bit patterns that we see when we trigger different actions off the base station here. And this actually looks a little bit more reasonable for us. So here we can actually start to see a pattern where the first ones are base station IDs. Those are always the same across all the messages. Great. That's probably our base station ID. We could probably stop there. The next one appears to be the number that we're putting in the keypad, which again makes some degree of sense because we can call a pager up to 999. It being 10 bits makes a lot of sense from an engineering perspective, which leaves 6 bits that we sort of don't know what they are, but every time we trigger a call, they're the same. So we can probably treat them as a constant, even if they're not truly a 6-bit constant. We can sort of move on with our lives and spend our time doing better things like reverse engineering restaurant pagers. This is kind of the bit pattern of our message. So we've got 26-bit totals. We've base station, some sort of argument. Usually it's a pager ID and a command. Okay, so now we get to the fun part. How do we actually generate data to trigger the pagers? This is the interesting part. We're going to generate signals to transmit over a software-defined radio in the same way that we received them. You can send it samples, and it'll transmit it over the air. We're going to generate it at 2 megasamples per second. That means that we're going to be transmitting 2 million pairs of int8s per second, so that's 4 million bytes per second. I guess it would be megabytes, wouldn't it? The first thing that we need to do here is figure out how long in duration that is. So if this is 2 million samples, we need to figure out what fraction of that is that quarter to transmit on or off. And so if we, right here, go back to how long our sample is, so that 858 number, we multiply that through for the 2 megasamples per second, we get 429 samples is equivalent to one of these windows here. I'm sorry, that's a quarter of the window. So that means that if you want to represent a 0, then you would transmit 429 IQ samples and then 429 times 3 of dead air, and then vice versa for a 1. And so now we know how many samples we would need to write out. So here's some rough Python. Here's where we actually get to some code, which will hopefully illustrate this a little bit closer. So to transmit dead air, you transmit a 0. So that's this thing on the top. So 0's dead air. Nothing's coming out of the antenna. To transmit out of the antenna, just like a normal carrier wave, we're going to send 127.0. This is the int8 max, and then a 0. And that's going to be 429 seconds. So that's a quarter of our symbol duration. This means we can represent a 1 by turning on the antenna for 3 of those durations, and then off for a quarter. And we can represent a 0 by turning it on for a quarter and letting 3/4 of it be dead air. So this is sort of a primitive that we can use. Now we can represent a 0 and a 1 symbol, which means we can encode our 0s and 1s. So we write a quick helper here, the bits to IQ helper. And so what this does is it accepts a number in the form of bits and a len in the form of number of bits to be sent. And it'll go through in most significant bit first and check to see if each bit is set. If it is, it's going to append 1 to the output list. Otherwise, if it's a 0, if it's not set, then we'll append the 0 samples to the message and then return the whole message. So basically what we're doing here is we're accepting some number, some set of bits in. We're going to convert that into a list of samples that are at the sample rate of our choosing. And then we're going to return them. If we go back to the preamble at the beginning, the engineering team has done us a solid. The preamble is just transmitting a bunch of 0s, which makes it easy because we don't have to write anything special. There's no special timings. We don't really have to spend too much time thinking about it. Instead, we could just send 26 bits of 0. Cool. If we want to encode the actual messages that we saw with that same structure that we derived earlier, 10 bits, 10 bits, 6 bits, we can write a helper here, which will concatenate the lists created by the first 10 bits, which is the base ID, the next 10 bits, which are the argument, and then the final 6 bits. So this allows you to pass numbers that get encoded into one of these packets formats. So this allows us to generate those data bursts. Finally, if we drop some constants that we derived from earlier that may or may not be right, but seem to work into the script here, we can create a call function. So we can accept the base ID and the pager ID that we want to call. We know the constant that we want to use, which is command call. And if we call this, we'll get back a list of numbers. And if we stuff those bytes into a software-defined radio, we should hopefully see a pager get triggered, which is cool. We like that because radios are cool and awesome, and all of you are into that. Okay. Last bit here is the actual data we recorded when we hit the call button wasn't just one data burst, right? It was a preamble, it was that wake up signal, and then it was a number of subsequent data packets afterwards to try to get the message across to the pager. So we need to do the same thing here, because if we just transmit the data, the pager may not hear it. It's usually listening for the preamble. So what we're going to do is we're going to transmit a bit of dead air, that 6 symbol padding. It can be anything at the beginning, but we'll just do that 6. We'll transmit the preamble plus some of the padding, and then we'll transmit that same message 5 times. And at the end of the day, what we're going to do is we're just going to take that and stuff it into stood out. Probably going to fuck your terminal up pretty bad if you run this in a terminal, but that's okay, because we can pipe it around to commands or write it to disk, which is probably what you want to do with the IQ data. How does it look in Spectrum? So we pipe it to disk. We open it up in Spectrum again, because it's a format that can read it. And we can analyze it to see if the timings look like what we expect, and they do. The preamble looks good. I measured everything. It looks good. I demodulated the bits by hand. They look good. Great. So let's do it. So here I have the Python script that we've written. I have a HackRF, which is a software-defined radio here. I have a pager here. It's pager number 6, which is the one constant that we use there. Fucking incredible. Radios are awesome. A lot of fun. It's super simple, nothing too crazy. And the cool part is the protocol that we talked about, the encoding that we talked about, is actually a really common one. I have 2 different sets of pagers with me here today. Both of them use this exact same encoding, as well as my Christmas tree. And this usually does run my actual Christmas tree. So one of the things I let my friends do is turn on and off my Christmas tree and set the dim and all the rest of it over the internet. And so doing anything there will transmit cause my software-defined radio to transmit and either make my Christmas more jolly or less jolly. And so, yeah, so I really want this to feel a little bit demystifying. Folks can get excited about this. After this talk in the chill out room, I'm going to bring all the pagers that I have with me, my radios, If you go to this website, so Paging All Radio Curious Hackers, PARCH, happened to be an acronym, and who am I to pass that up? I took some captures already of all the devices to make it easier to reverse engineer. I'll be hanging out in there. Come try it. I hear that the policy roundtables are using restaurant pagers. I can't endorse anyone doing anything with this information, but I will have software-defined radios in that room. And yeah, I don't know if I have time for questions, but that's that.
You do like one.
I can do one question.
One question. Better be good.
Okay, better be good.
No problem. Should I be the loudest or the fastest? We got one over there.
Yep. Oh,
Loud fast.
okay.
I will repeat it. Yeah.
It looked like you were using Edis, SDR. Do you recommend that over the HackRF1 when you're doing the IQ capture?
That's a great question. So the question is spotted very accurately that I had an Edis USRP B210 Mini. It was in that photo. I love Edis. I love their products. They will bankrupt you real quick if you're a person. So I tend to look at these software-defined radios in terms of value. For $10 you can get a radio, and you can just keep adding zeros, and you can keep buying radios, and that's about the increment. So if you're willing to fork over a couple thousand, love Edis. Really high quality, super Gucci stuff. HackRF will not break the bank as much. Same with the Pluto SDR. I also really like a lot. They're definitely super high value. So.
Awesome. We had another big round of applause for Paul.